Yellowstone Supervolcano. Is eruption imminent? Scientists have monitored seismic activity, gas emissions, and the movement of the Earth's crust around the world's largest active volcano for decades. But when will it blow? There are more than 100 million people living within driving distance of Yellowstone National Park, and millions more who live along the path of its massive eruption plume. Are they in any danger? Let's take a look at what we know about Yellowstone Supervolcano and its history to understand why it is such a threat and whether we should be worried about another eruption anytime soon. Yellowstone National Park spans parts of 3 states: Wyoming, Montana, and Idaho. It is famous for its beautiful canyons carved by the Yellowstone River, its abundant wildlife, and its geysers. The most famous of these is Old Faithful, but there are hundreds more scattered around the park. And all these geysers are evidence of the magma chamber that lies beneath the surface of the Earth there. This magma chamber is what makes Yellowstone a supervolcano. But how do scientists know that there's a giant pool of molten rock under Yellowstone? Well, the answer is simple: earthquakes. Over the past few decades, there has been a lot of seismic activity around Yellowstone, especially in the eastern part of the caldera. But this earthquake swarm didn't just happen once. In fact, it's been happening regularly since the mid-1980s. Now, we don't know exactly what causes these swarms, but they are almost certainly caused by the movement of magma below the surface. Magma is less dense than solid rock, so it rises toward the surface. As it does, it causes the surrounding rocks to fracture, and that causes the release of fluids which triggers earthquakes. If you zoom into this map of earthquake epicenters around Yellowstone, you can see that they are clustered near Norris Geyser Basin, which is one of the most geothermally active areas in the park. Scientists believe that the magma chamber responsible for the creation of Yellowstone caldera is located somewhere beneath this area. Just how big is it? Well, according to a paper published in 2014, the magma chamber responsible for the formation of Yellowstone caldera is approximately 43 by 28 miles, or 70 by 45 kilometers in size. That's roughly the size of Manhattan. But if you compare it to the actual caldera, you can see that the magma chamber is only about half the size of the enormous crater that was formed by previous eruptions. This means that even though the magma chamber may be huge, it doesn't contain enough magma to cause another supereruption like the ones that happened in the past. The first historical eruption of Yellowstone was 2.1 million years ago. It created the Huckleberry Ridge eruption, which had a volcanic explosivity index or VEI rating of 8. The second largest eruption happened 1.3 million years ago and was given a VI rating of 7. Then came the Lava Creek eruption 640,000 years ago with a VEI rating of 8. The youngest and most recent supereruption occurred 12,000 years ago with a VEI rating of 8. The Huckleberry Ridge and Lava Creek eruptions ejected more than 2,400 cubic miles or 10,000 cubic kilometers of material. These eruptions built up the massive Absaroka, Gallatin, and Madison ranges that surround Yellowstone Valley. You might wonder why it took so long after the first eruption for the second one to occur. The answer is that there were actually thousands of smaller eruptions in between. For example, the Mesa Falls eruption happened 1.3 million years ago, which is only 300,000 years after the Huckleberry Ridge eruption. But there were also periods of quiet. For instance, there were no eruptions at all for 600,000 years between the Lava Creek eruption and the Mesa Falls eruption. So, how likely is it that we will see another supereruption in our lifetime? According to scientists, the chances are extremely low. They estimate that there is a 1 in 730,000 chance of an eruption every year. So, you're more likely to get struck by lightning several times over than to witness Yellowstone blowing its top. Even the U.S. Geological Survey agrees that a major eruption is not imminent. Nevertheless, the agency maintains a close eye on the volcano just in case. The USGS monitors seismic activity, ground deformation, and gas emissions from the volcano. If there were signs that an eruption was imminent, they would issue an alert. But what would happen if they did issue such an alert? What should we do? Should you pack your bags and move away from the potential path of destruction? No. Evacuating millions of people would be a logistical nightmare, and there's no need to do so. If an eruption were to happen, the vast majority of people would not be in any real danger. A major eruption would send ash and debris into the atmosphere, which could disrupt air travel and damage crops, but the area most affected would be the one directly surrounding the volcano. This includes Yellowstone National Park and the towns of Gardner, West Yellowstone, and Cook City. According to the USGS, an eruption would eject about 1,000 cubic miles or 4,000 cubic kilometers of ash and pumice. Most of this material would fall within 50 miles or 80 kilometers of the volcano. Only a small amount would make it further than 200 miles or 320 kilometers away. What about the rest of the country? Will we see a repeat of the 1980 eruption of Mount St. Helens, which sent ash plumes as far away as Canada and Mexico? No. Although the Yellowstone eruptions would be much larger than the Mount St. Helens eruption, the winds would keep the ash mostly confined to the western half of the country. Even if some ash were to make it to the east coast, it would only cause minor damage. So while there would definitely be some short-term consequences, life would go on as normal for most Americans. In fact, some people would probably benefit from a Yellowstone eruption. A study published in Nature Communications argued that the climate consequences of a supereruption would actually be beneficial for some regions. For example, a summer eruption would cause global temperatures to cool by 1 degree Celsius or 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit. Winter temperatures would drop by 3 degrees Celsius or 5.4 degrees Fahrenheit. This would be great news for countries like India, where temperatures have been rising faster than average and heat waves are becoming more frequent. But what about the long term? How would a Yellowstone eruption affect the climate in 100 years or 1,000 years? Surprisingly, scientists expect it to have little effect. According to a paper published in 2018, the climate effects of past Yellowstone eruptions were largely over within 100 years. This means that even though the initial impact would be significant, things would quickly return to normal. Of course, we're talking about averages here. Some places would be hit harder than others, and some regions might experience a few extra years of colder temperatures. So it seems that a Yellowstone eruption would have some negative short-term effects, but nothing too catastrophic. We really shouldn't worry about it, right? Well, hold on, because there's more to the story. See, it turns out that Yellowstone isn't just one volcano, it's actually 3 separate calderas in a row. Each time the magma chamber beneath Yellowstone emptied during an eruption, it left behind a massive crater. And each time new magma rose up from deep within the Earth's mantle to create another eruption. These calderas are the upper, middle, and lower. The upper caldera is the one that we've been talking about so far. It's the youngest of the 3, and it's also the most active. However, it hasn't erupted in the past 640,000 years. Instead, the last eruption of the Yellowstone Supervolcano actually happened in the middle caldera 1.3 million years ago. But this doesn't mean that the upper caldera is safe. In fact, scientists think that both calderas could erupt again, and if they did, it would be even more devastating than before. Why is that? Well, the reason is that there's still magma left over from previous eruptions trapped beneath the upper caldera. If this magma were to mix with the magma coming from the mantle, it could cause an eruption that is even bigger than the previous ones. This is because the magma in the magma chamber is less dense than the surrounding rock, so it rises to the surface. But the magma from the previous eruptions has already solidified, and it's the same density as the surrounding rock, so it doesn't rise. Instead, it gets pushed aside as the new magma forces its way up. Eventually, though, there won't be any room left for the old magma, and it will start to melt. This would lower the viscosity of the magma in the magma chamber and make it more likely to erupt. How likely is this to happen? Well, nobody knows. But some scientists think it could increase the likelihood of an eruption by as much as 50%. If that's true, then we should definitely be paying closer attention to Yellowstone. What do you think? Do you think we should be worried about Yellowstone erupting? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Also, if you enjoyed this video, please like and share it with your friends. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope you learned something new. Goodbye.